Hi, my name is Ray Edmonds. Welcome to my art workshop. Today I want to share with you some tips on how to be a better artist. Or if you're not an artist, perhaps these tips will help you begin. I want to help you learn how to see. See as an artist sees. See some of the basic forms in building a picture. Some of the basic forms that already exist in nature. So why don't you come along and join me? The basic forms in art, of course, is line and form or shape. So we're not going to talk about line too much, but just to show you, here's a line, right? Now you can make lines any which way you want. You can make them in curves, circles, straight lines, angles, whatever you want to do. So anyone can do this. But can you begin to see these forms in nature? That's what we're trying to talk about today. Well, here's some straight lines, or reasonably straight. And so what do we see here? Well, we see the beginning of a square, maybe a triangle, maybe a rectangle, and maybe a circle. And you can take these basic forms and rearrange them in slender forms, wider forms than this, different angles, you can squash the circles to make smaller, we'll call them squash circles. Really, they're ellipses or ovals. So you can see, you can begin to take any of these forms. You can take the beginning of what is a rectangle and put a triangle on it, and you begin to see, let's finish that triangle so you can see a little better. You turn that around, and what do you have? Well, you have the beginning of a tent or a house or garage, whatever. Put a couple more rectangles in there and you see what you have. So it's a matter of seeing those forms in nature. Well, here's some very basic forms. Here's some rectangles, which makes a fence or something that looks similar to a fence. There's a rectangle, and you can actually make a tree out of that, can't you? Well, even a person, you can have a now you say, I can draw that. Well, sure you can. And you can even have these people we actually see people of all shapes and sizes, don't we? Now with a little bending around, you can begin to make all kinds of forms. You can even have a square with a couple rectangles on it, and you see what you have. So what I'm saying is you have a lot of forms already in nature that you already know, and perhaps you haven't seen them. Well, let's look at another form. Here is an outline of a duck, and look at the forms already in that duck. What do you see? Well, you'll see sort of a circle. That is either a rectangle or it could be a triangle. And here is an oval. You see some triangles all through here. to make his feathers. So even anyone can do this after you begin to see these basic forms in nature. That translates, if you want to make a picture out of it, into something like that. This is actually a pencil drawing, a photo of a pencil drawing years ago. You can see these same basic forms, can't you? You see the oval or the circle and the lines in there, the triangle, and again the oval, and the little triangles. So you can actually construct a picture just by the angles. Now here's a photograph, a simple photograph of a marsh, late evening. And what do you see in here? What forms are we talking about that you see in here? Well, it's pretty simple. You can see some lines. Obviously, all the reeds bent over are all lines. And you can see these tops of the cattails are just simple lines. And the cattails, the bud, or whatever you call this, is very, very small rectangles. And over here is basically nothing more than sort of rectangles with a little bit of shaving off, and you begin to see. Well, you could make a picture out of this. Let's look at simplified a little bit. There it is, same thing. That's actually the beginning sketch of a watercolor or some other painting. In fact, this is what that painting turned out to be. Put some ducks in it, simplified a little bit, and there you are. Okay, let's look at another form. This is a painting of mine that I turned into a black and white copy so that you could see the lines a little clearer. What forms do you see here? Well, basically you just see a curved line here, a rectangle, and on top a little curved line on top of the rectangle, a little box up here, a square, with a little couple triangles on top, right? And some rectangles with some triangles here. And even these rocks can be turned into simple rectangles or squares, such as this. So if you see these, you'll see these are all just forms that are rounded off a little bit. You see how simple this is? Translate what you see in nature to these simple forms. All right, let's look at another one then. Here is a picture of a house up in the mountains. It's a small view. Maybe I can show you a little better. That's fairly simple because it's a straight-on view. But what do you see? What forms do you see? Well, forget the car. Even that has some rectangles. Some rectangles. But you see a box here with a triangle on top. So you see a square with a rectangle on top. And here is a rectangle, another rectangle, some rectangles for windows and doors, a rectangular space down here, and a little bit of a triangle, but a rectangle and a box back there. So it's very simple. And you can draw a line for the mountain back there, a couple lines for the road, and you've got a picture. Now if you looked at that one way, you can translate it this way. This was slightly a different picture than the one I showed you, but it's a little bit off on the angle. But what do you see here? Well, again, you see the box, the rectangle, with a triangle on top. And this forms a triangle also. a couple rectangles on top, a square here, or a triangle here, two rectangles. This is a triangle. Triangle here on the corner. I'll color that in to show you more plainly. A rectangle here in the shaded side. And a rectangle here, a rectangle for the doors and windows. And there you have it, a couple of small elongated rectangles on the bottom. So if you reduce all of what you see in nature to these simple forms, everything becomes much easier to do. Here's a photograph of a church, and here you'll see these same forms. Triangles, rectangles, elongated rectangles, sort of a square with two sides there, with some perspective showing here. Triangles, the roofs are triangles. Triangles for the steeple, rectangles here. So you see all these shapes begin to sort of form if you train your eye to see them. This is what the eye begins to see if you outline your picture. There you see all the angles. And you can take this, if you could draw this simple form using these triangles and rectangles. And I didn't draw this, I drew this rapidly so that you would see it doesn't really take a wonderful drawing. So then you can begin to color in these, so to speak. Begin to learn how to put things together. Alright, let's move on. As you'll notice, it's getting a little more complicated each time. The pictures are, at least. Well, here is a very familiar bridge to some people who are historic history nuts. This is Burnside Bridge in Antietam Battlefield in Sharpsburg, Maryland. Very famous spot for Civil War advocates. And you see the basic forms here. What are they? Well, what's obvious to this picture, which is a very the focus of this picture, of course, is the bridge. And you see these half circles sitting on rectangles at the bottom. Here's a triangle with the sort of buttresses there. And that's about all that bridge is. So you could begin to sketch this just looking for these forms. Looking for these half circles sitting on rectangles. The little line on top. Now all of this rock work is triangles and rectangles again. So it's not as difficult as it sounds or looks at first. You see here, you can begin to see. Here's the sort of rough drawing that you might make in nature. Here you see the half circles. There's the triangles sitting on rectangles, and so it's very simple. Now from that, of course, you can make a painting. This is one watercolor that I did of that. I changed the season of the year to the fall. But here again you see what's prominent are these circles sitting on rectangles at the bottom, half circles rather, and that's about it. And the brickwork, of course, rock work, is all rectangles. So it's not as difficult as it sounds or even looks, right? Well, getting a little more complicated now. This is a picture of Peggy's Cove in Nova Scotia, and you might say, what's the central focus of this picture? As an artist that's developing their skills, you begin to have to learn composition of your pictures, and you have to learn what's the central focus of not the photograph, but of the picture that you want to develop. Well, I felt the most important thing was this house up here. Some people might say, well, it's the boats. Well, it may be. You could make that the central focus, but I'll show you what I did a little later. But what are the forms in this picture? It's actually very simple. What are the forms? Like a little test here. Well, up the house is really a box with a roof on it. There's a triangle. There's the rectangle with diagonal lines. Down here are the rectangles. Here is the rectangle, a triangle, I'm sorry, a triangle form coming here for the landmass. And all of these are just long, elongated ellipses, ovals, some squares in there for rocks. And when you look at this painting here, this photograph, you began to see the boat. There's the triangle. See? There's a triangle. Same way up here. There's the triangle. And then you just finish off the boat with some rectangles and some curved lines. Of course, the rest of it is very plain in what it is. So it's a very simple picture. Now this is what I drew up as a sketch for what I was going to paint. You notice that the boats are smaller, but they still have the triangles for the ends and the squares, and the same forms here, same forms in the house. Put a little bird in, but actually the wings are like triangles, aren't they? But that's one of the minor things. And this is the picture that came of that sketch. Now on this one, you see, it's now a colorized version of all the others. But again, what you see, these boats are pointing up to that house. The house is the same form as I said before, just triangles and rectangles, squares, same way with the boats. So that's all you need to do, is to find those forms in nature. This is a sketch. I don't have a tracing of it, but this is a sketch that I did for the picture. And you see, now we're putting more elements in the picture. They're getting a little larger. But back here, all of these farmhouses are made up of what? Squares, rectangles, some rather long rectangles with some half circles on top. If you break all that down, go simple, step by step, looking at these forms in nature. I'm sorry I don't have a photograph of that. Even the horse and sleigh is made up of squares. That's a rectangle if you square him off. Sort of a triangle coming up there, or a rectangle coming down for his mouth too. And there you'll see the basic form of a square, rectangle. Even the hat is a rectangle. Little round head. So you see, it's all very easily broken down if you look for those forms in nature. Now that's a small version of the picture that came from that. And there you see the forms again. Now you can see them a little better because we've got color added. You see the dark roofs and the white rectangles and squares. And even the design of the picture is in triangle form, leading your eye back to that house. This is entitled Coming Home, or Going Home. So you see all the elements right there. Even the design of the whole picture is in a circle. Well, let's get a little more complicated. Well, yes, I guess you did, you say. This is a picture of Venice, of course, and the canals of Venice. And here, which is a very serious picture to have to paint, so I just wanted to show you, though, that even in this complicated architectural picture, there are things that you can look for if you train your eye. A good artist will begin to see. How would an artist break this down? Well, first of all, he or she sees this line coming down here. These are lines of perspective coming to the focal point out here. And you see that is pointing the same way. So if you put your pencils there, you'll see though all these lines up here on the house, they're all coming down. They're all moving toward this center point here. What's a little complicated for beginners, but of course advanced artists know that. Many of them would simplify that picture and not put in all that detail, but look at the detail here. It's all rectangles, one after another. You see these rectangles. They'll just put, some are wider, some are narrow. At the top of these there are some, I don't know if you can see that or not, but there are some half circles, but they're sort of squashed up almost into ovals up there. But look at that. All the forms that we've talked about are there. So you would have to simplify this, of course, or it would be too busy probably. So your eye would do this. I shaded in part of this so it not so many vertical lines. But you see, that's all it is. You see all the rectangles. There are a few triangles on top of the rectangles here and there, but that's all you would do. Well, let's get a little more advanced here. Here's another picture from Venice. This one's a little more simplified than that one, I suppose, because here you see different kinds of lines. You see more half circles. You see these half circles, and at the tops of the windows, half circles sitting on top of rectangles. I know I'm getting redundant, but those are all the forms that are in nature, so we have to keep talking about them. You see the lines of these gondolas. They're coming out here in triangles, coming out to a point, sliding upward, of course, as they do, but all these lines back into here, of course, it gets into rectangles, but it's still the same lines. It's a little busy here. I wouldn't paint this quite like this if I were going to paint it. And here, of course, you have the rectangle for the building, and rectangles on top of each other. Even the awning up here is a rectangle. So this is as you might simplify that picture to make it a little more to see the outlines of it. And that's what your eye has to do, to see the outlines of these forms. Now again, I would simplify this picture if I were going to do it, not put as many gondolas in, perhaps blur out the edges or something, but here you see the awnings and the ovals, half circles, etc. All of these rectangles sitting on top of each other, the brickwork even. So it's just a matter of doing that in training your eye to see that in nature. Well, I have one final one that I want to show you. And you say, well, now you're getting really complicated. This is a photo of a church in middle of well, towards the western part of Virginia that I painted. And you'll see now that it's a little darker photograph, but you can see all of these, as most churches, are just rectangles on top of each other till you get to the steeple, which is triangles. Here's a triangle, here's a triangle, and all of these narrow rectangles. Rectangulars for all the windows. These, like most churches, have little half ovals on top of them. You can see these ovals here, half circles, all the way down. So it's a matter of just looking for those things. And here is a line drawing of it. I'm sorry, the printer didn't turn it out the right way, but in a vertical view. So if you look at this, you'll see all of the lines that are in here. all of the rectangles, the triangles. It's just training your eye to see that outline. Well, here you see that painting from after it was completed. And if you look at that, again, all it is what? Rectangles and triangles. There's your triangles. And basically that's it, and half circles. Everything else is pretty much as I said, just a bunch of big rectangles, elongated, squared, triangles of different angles, and of course that's what you make all pictures from. Well, I hope these tips have helped you to be able to see some of the basic forms in nature and maybe translate them into a picture. I'm glad you joined me. Next time I'm going to share how you can take these basic forms and translate them, these simple forms, and translate them into a simple picture. Why don't you join me?